Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
Indigenous Black and brown women are my main teachers, honestly, because they're the ones who can teach me the most about what's needed and what's needed to get healed. Just like when we're talking about gender equality, we need to go to women to hear, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with gender diverse leaders? How do we deal with bringing balance that is egalitarian? I want to listen to the women.
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now. The farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Welcome back to our conversation with Osprey Orielle Lake. This is the second part of our conversation. The first part aired last week, and if you haven't listened yet, we definitely recommend you go back and listen. Osprey is the author of the recently released The Story is in Our Bones. She is a climate justice activist and executive director of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network.
In part 2 of this conversation, Osprey talks about listening to women's voices in addressing the problems we face today, especially the indigenous and Black and brown women that she works with through WECAN. We also discuss reconnecting with ancestral roots, regenerating ancestral practices, and recognizing our origins as a way of reconnecting with the land.
As we unpack some of these complex issues with Osprey, we open up some of the difficult subject matter that Osprey has taken on in her writing and her work, and we feel so fortunate to be able to talk with her openly about it because it is really good dirt. So here is the second part of our incredible conversation with Osprey Orielle Lake. Enjoy.
How are we in this animate living earth and how that heals us spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically to be in this living earth and to reclaim that and feel that at every level. So the end of the book really goes into the stories around that.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for that overview. That I have so many questions and curiosities about all these things you brought up. One of them being, I believe you said it was the myth of whiteness. Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, again, we're talking about a lot of pages that I'm going to summarize.
Understood.
Racism and our identities is such a huge topic. One that I think we all need to take extremely seriously, given that we live in white supremacist societies. I mean, there's just no nice way to put it. It's part of the problem because as many people in the climate justice movement are pointing out, there would not be the capacity to be extracting from the land fossil fuels or minerals or the level of deforestation that we're seeing if there actually wasn't white supremacy and racism. Why we say that is because where is all this harm going on? Here in the United States of America, there isn't fracking and fossil fuel extraction in primarily wealthy white areas. It is happening on indigenous lands. It is happening on Black and brown communities. Just look at the Gulf South. And so there's this big relationship between how much we are destroying the land and where it's okay to do that in sacrifice communities or sacrifice zones, where other communities that look like us are not having that experience as much. And so if you could not destroy other people's lands, and there wasn't this othering of where it was okay to do that, we would also be treating the earth in a very, very different way. And so it's very hard to separate out ecological issues from racial issues because they're intersecting, just like it's hard to remove gender and the impacts that are happening to women because they are not on a level playing field, whether it's their mobility in a country, their economy, they're going to be at a disadvantaged point. So the whole issue around getting at the myth of whiteness is also how it was created to produce supremacy, to continue this idea of these hierarchies. And so how do we begin to dismantle white supremacy? How do we look at the myth of whiteness? Because it's, again, a very large topic, but it's part of addressing racism is to understand that everyone at some point goes back to some indigenous heritage somewhere. That begins to unwind this idea of white people, which was created. So in the book, I go into examples. As an example, when Italians first came to the United States of America, they were considered people of color. They were not part of the white population. And so it's suddenly when you came to the United States of America, people were now no longer Italian or Greek or wherever they were from. People were put eventually into this category of whiteness that then generated the colonization that we see here in the United States of America and the destruction of indigenous peoples here, the absolute massacre and genocide of indigenous people in our country. And so that separation, and obviously then we would add into that the horrific enslavement of Black people, come here and do all of the work of the land as slaves to white people. So this whole idea of whiteness has to be understood when we're talking about root causes, going back to root causes of how this invention of white people came over time, and then white supremacy is critical to healing our relationships to one another, the wars around the world that are going on right now, to really address these uncomfortable conversations about racism, the myth of whiteness. What is our identity? And for me, some of that, the healing path towards that is understanding we all come from people of the land, and we need to go and really understand our ancestries and get through this colonized time, this patriarchal time, to reclaim our pre-colonial or pre-patriarchal understandings of who we are, and also be in constant conversation with anti-racism movements, anti-colonial concepts. And this is really deep work. It's not comfortable work, but it's something that's part of our time and is calling out from the Black Lives Matter movement to the indigenous rights movement all over the world to what's going on in Palestine and Israel right now. We're seeing this crying out for there to be an end to white supremacy and the lifting up of everyone on an equal basis and truly having gender and racial equity. And so this is what we're getting at when we're talking about ending the myth of whiteness and understanding it, but also giving people a way to go, which is, these rich ancestries that we've left behind that need to be reclaimed and rejuvenated and celebrated. So while we're kind of dismantling a lot of oppressive systems, there's a lot to give remembrance to and regeneration of our own understanding that is in our bones of our connection to the land and each other.
Oh, this is a very, very fascinating topic to me. And you've just helped frame it so much for me. How no matter what our current or recent ethnic heritage is, we all have some roots in indigeneity. And how do we find those? If we're many generations separated from that, or if we are classified as white, how do we find our way back to our own roots that were close to the land and close to the earth?
It turns out that is a very important endeavor, because
Yes.
I feel like one of the reasons we have the myth of whiteness and cling to whiteness, if you don't have anything else, then you're going to cling to something for our identity. Humans desire belonging, desire community, desire to have identity. It's normal. But, what if it's built on false precepts? You're going to hang on to it because of that belonging and identity. And so this whole journey of going into our own ancestors and when they were indigenous to the land, wherever they were at some point, is extraordinarily healing. Because for me, I have this sense of, if you don't have that, there's a giant emptiness that people feel, this quiet emptiness of where do we belong? How are we connected? And without that, I think there's a direct correlation around consumerism and a hyper individualized society, me, 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 me. And I'm trying to fill myself up because I'm actually feeling really empty. And so this reconnection with our ancestral roots that were connected to the earth is essential, because then you're standing on ground of belonging to the land. You understand where your ancestors come from on the land. And many of us, I'm not saying this is an easy thing. How do you go about doing this? There's history research, there's finding maybe your family trees and all of these things. And I go into this in the book a lot about like some of the ways that I've gone about studying my own personal family history. But the main point is like, even if you just find tidbits and tattered pieces, it brings a different sense of well-being. The more I've learned about my ancestors, where they've come from, their connection to the land, I find myself being more fulfilled and not looking for something outside to fill us up from something culturally that is not present in our culture. So, it's not about just like looking to the past, but then like how to bring some of those practices and regenerate them in our current ecological and cultural context. Because a lot of those land practices are maybe not from where we are right now. They're from somewhere else, but we can still learn about them because it just sets our mind and a worldview into a certain fulfillment that I think is very devoid in our mainstream society that creates a lot of violence, a lot of consumerism and imbalance. And this is deep stuff, but it's also like, if we're going to really get good soil as farmers, this is like good cultural soil that we need to get into and make good soil, or we're not going to have a healthy society.
I appreciate this so much because I think for me, as you're talking, I'm realizing that we all need to realize, number one, the earth is our common ground, no matter what our ethnic origins are. It's the common denominator for all humans is the earth and the cycles of nature. And a lot of us might not be aware of how far back, our ancestry goes or what our ancient roots are or those ancient traditions. But we can be assured that we go back further than the Industrial Revolution, which is, where so many of these patterns were put into place. Whoever we are, our origins go back before that. They go way, way back. Just accepting that and opening our eyes to it, I think, is liberating.
There's also a lot of trauma wrapped up in that. I think maybe it's not something that has even been able, at this moment in time, it's something that people seem willing to do and it seems important enough to do. It's like a rewiring happening of our systems to look at that trauma and, see it for what it was or what it still is. And also something that you said, Osprey, really clicked for me about whiteness and disconnection, and in being disconnected from, in this case, in the context of this conversation, we're talking about our connection with the earth. I think if we're disconnected in any way from the earth, from each other, from ourselves, that makes it easier to engage in harm and hurt. And whether it's ourselves or even just the concept of otherness is disconnection, right? So yeah, I think it's very, to what you're saying, Mom, very big ideas, but everyone has a responsibility and everyone belongs somewhere at some point, even if that story or that knowledge has been absent or has been forgotten in your own lifetime.
So, Emma, I think what you're saying is like that disconnection from the earth, from that common denominator that we all have, makes it easier for us to participate in the system of hierarchy and power.
Yes, and I think that's something that hadn't quite clicked for me until Osprey said it about white supremacy and why that exists, because it just so happens that whiteness is generally, because we've moved around and colonized the world more than many other groups, is the disconnected one. And especially in this land, in North America, the indigenous peoples are closer to where they started. And they are the oppressed because that's how it has played out. That hadn't quite connected for me until she said that whiteness kind of equals disconnection in a way.
And when I say for us to acknowledge that whoever we are, we go back way before the Industrial Revolution. What I mean by that is, to your point, Osprey, if a group of people don't have any like rich, long-standing heritage to reach back on, then what do they grasp? The consumer society that we've built and the systems that we've built around consumerism and capitalism, which all go way, way back, even before the Industrial Revolution, slavery and colonization, of course, all of that. But our more recent history, that would be the thing to buy into, this society that latches on to, acquisition, production, manufacturing, excess, all of that. That might become, and has become a heritage, so to speak.
You mean the heritage being the colonization and industrialization? And yeah, that's interesting.
We don't have the connection to go back further than that and take ourselves all the way back to the common denominator that we all humans have, which is the earth.
You're blowing our minds, Osprey.
I'm having very good time hearing you guys just riff off of each other and open this up. and think it through. I mean, I'm delighted. I'm just going, this is great. This was the whole point of writing the book and having a discussion to do exactly what you both are doing. So I'm deeply touched by your conversation and comments and watching you process the information and make connections and take it to the next point.
Yeah, and it can be it can be uncomfortable and tricky and hard, and
I'm often scared of saying something that's going to offend or sound tone deaf. It's a little scary to open it up like this, but you're giving us the language here or the ways to think about it that I don't know. Here we are.
So thank
talking.
you.
Yeah, no, it's been, I wanted to also, I think that, just to add in a little bit here is I do think that they are difficult conversations, undoubtedly, but also kind of going back to what we were talking about a little while ago, even though they're difficult, we know we need to have them and it feels good. It's like it hurts good because we don't want to be in this white supremacist world. None of us who are really trying to bring healing and care, we know it's not right. And it has to change. And there'll be things that we personally have to change. I think sometimes there's a lot of fear for, just put it bluntly, white women, that how they're going to lose out if they lift up their indigenous Black and brown sisters. Okay. Like what's going to be taken away from me? Because is it going to hurt my income? Is it going to hurt my status? Is it going to hurt my employment? All of these things. So yeah, it's like, let's get into it, and how do we move into a place of abundance? That there's enough for everyone. This is not a competition. Nature shows us every day, the more diversity, the healthier an ecosystem. And so I think one of our roles is to work on dismantling the myth of whiteness, really get into, having an anti-racist viewpoint on everything that we're doing and how we act, which means working on ourselves as well as supporting our communities and being, lifting up diversity and being very inclusive and listening and centering indigenous and Black and brown people. And for me specifically, indigenous Black and brown women, like how do we center their voices? How do we step back? There's all these things that need to go on, but how do we move it out of a place of fear into a place of abundance and joy and the feeling of the joy of being in an egalitarian society, the joy of not being in white supremacy? And so I think this is also a question that can continue on to really look at all of those things from a very personal level to a societal level. And, how do we integrate that into all the work that we're doing and ensure that we're doing that? So a lot of the work we do at WECAN is really lifting up other voices and stepping back and also knowing that indigenous and Black and brown women that I work with are incredibly powerful leaders. And a lot of times when you go to where the most pain is or the most challenge, you're going to find the best solutions. Indigenous Black and brown women are my main teachers, honestly, because they're the ones who can teach me the most about what's needed and what's needed to get healed. Just like when we're talking about gender equality, we need to go to women to hear how do we deal with this? How do we deal with gender diverse leaders? How do we deal with bringing balance that is egalitarian? I want to listen to the women. So yeah, I just wanted to bring forward those points. And then lastly, the excitement of kind of what you were getting at, Mary, also is how we go back to our pre-colonized, pre-colonial, pre-patriarchal ancestries. There's a lot of richness there that we can find in these stories and land practices that I think are really enriching. Just like if you look across Europe, look at all the ancient stone wheels that were made that honored the seasons and an animate living earth landscape and remembering those ancestries. I mean, there's evidence all over the world. I put a lot of these examples in the book. I'll just maybe end on one of them, which is I had learned in the stories as in one of the chapters on reciprocity before my grandmother died. She let me know about this practice in her childhood in Ukraine around a young maiden being chosen at the springtime. It's a very long story, so I'm trying to think of it how to shorten it. But anyways, to be the one that represented the spring season and ride a horse around the village and around particularly the crops that were planted to do like a blessing of the land and ask for a good harvest. Then a beautiful painted egg representing like fertility was planted into the soil as a gift to the land to give reciprocity for what the earth gives to us, this beautiful painted egg. And so that really had a big influence on me. So I've been actually doing painted eggs in my garden ever since of like, oh, I'm going to be getting this harvest of the lettuce and the carrots and the onions, but like, here's a gift, my understanding that this is a gift being given to me, these seeds, these plants, I'm not just taking, but like, how can I, it's a small gesture, but it's the worldview, the understanding that I'm giving something to the earth thoughtfully for the harvest that will be given to me. In addition to also, trying to be good soil and all of those things and compost, but getting our mind around like, how do we remember some of these practices that connect us to the land and where they come from in our own ancestries. And I've just found in discussions with people have amazing family stories that they didn't even realize until they talked about them. Like, oh, this recipe or this song or this little thing that my grandmother did has the significance. So even these little pieces can be extremely valuable to help us remember that story that is in our bones.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it so much.
This has been so wonderful. And we would love to hear from you what slow living means to you, and if you're able to practice slow living in your everyday life and what that looks like.
I love that. It's something I really cherish and am a very beginner at. I'll go to the positive part because I can give a lot of examples
Yes.
For me, I will go back to just this last winter. We had a break when WECAN shut down for 2 weeks, which I hadn't done in a very long time. Anyone who runs a nonprofit, you don't like close down very often. But in that time period, I really did ask that question. And I, went for nature hikes every day. Our work is very intense because we work with women on the front lines. There's a lot of crises that happen. It's also good just to take a minute. And I feel very privileged. Frontline women are not getting a break from the emergency and the crisis they're in. So I feel really privileged if I take time off, but also just needed to be with nature and get my cup filled back up again. And it was just beautiful. So the slow living for me has to do with not being overscheduled and how do we move ourselves from just the time constraints of how we organize our days, just to have some spaciousness to think, to live, to walk on the land and not be preoccupied with the list of stuff to do, which we all have. And for me, a lot of that slowness is truly the joy of just, oh, I got some time in nature. Oh, I'm doing the dishes and I'm not rushing. I'm just washing the dishes because I'm not on the way to something else. And it seems so small, but it is actually there. So much joy. The conversation with both of you today, it's for me, this is part of slowness. I'm not doing anything but being present with both of you, being present with my friends, cooking a good meal. As time goes on, those things actually are incredibly precious. Laying in bed a little bit longer to remember a dream. It just seems so minuscule, but it's the conversation, sitting under that tree, picking the carrot, doing the dishes slowly is practicing for me the world that I want to see for all of us. So just enjoying being in the present moment and not so overpacked in time. So I will just leave it at that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And although you've touched on it several times, we always ask our guests, what does the good dirt mean to you? That might be a metaphor, that might be literal, but any way you want to answer that, the good dirt.
Oh, good dirt is a conversation like this to me where we're learning from each other and we're sharing with listeners, hopefully bringing hope and inspiration to others. And how are we collectively creating the soil of a good culture, as we've talked about in this conversation? What are we really doing to look at the root causes, which means building delicious, fertile, healthy soil for current and future generations? That's the good dirt.
Thank you so much.
This has been so wonderful. Is there anything you'd like to leave with the audience? What do you want people to most understand about the work that you're doing? We've talked about so much today, but we really didn't do too much into the organization and what exactly you guys are doing. So there's anything about that you want to say more on, just anything else you want to leave folks with?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a little bit about WECAN. I think that's a good ending point. We're a very small team and people are welcome to go to our website, which is www.wecaninternational.org. And we do everything from protecting old growth forests, as you heard a little bit about, and then reforestation in the DR Congo and in the Amazon. We did a big forest campaign in the Tongass rainforest in Alaska. We're involved in a lawsuit there right now, actually, to protect Tongass. We're very involved in working with indigenous women there to protect over 9 million acres of old growth forest, under something called the roadless rule up in Alaska. And then we do a lot of fights to stop fossil fuel extraction pipelines. And, so that's a big part of our work, write a lot of reports. We also have a food sovereignty program, which is really exciting, working with people in different regions to create food sovereignty and grow their own medicines. And how do we actually create these hubs that are going to be able to navigate through the increasing climate crisis. I mean, things to me are going to get worse before they get better. So like, how do we really prepare people to be self-sustaining? So we have some programs around that. And then we do, a lot of advocacy at the UN climate talks every year where countries come together, where the Paris Climate Agreement was established. So that's a big part of our work. How do we intervene in those spaces so we can make sure there is climate justice, there is representation of gender equity and indigenous peoples, and make sure our voices are heard in those spaces. So we bring a lot of frontline women to, different UN forums throughout the year, make sure their voices are heard. And then we do this rights of nature work, which we talked about. And that's a big part of our programming as well, and how we further rights of nature all over the world. And the last thing I'll say is I'm really honored to be on something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is something that really deals with the supply and coal, oil, and gas, and how we get countries to have a mechanism to actually phase out fossil fuels. So it's really a complement to the Paris Climate Agreement, which really deals with carbon emission reductions, which is very important. And there's important work going on there, but it's really not sufficient. We really need another mechanism to just phase out fossil fuels. And that's what this fossil fuel treaty is about. And there have been over 11 countries now that have endorsed the treaty. So it's been pretty exciting. So again, it's this work around like, how do we actually stop fossil fuels and get into, a green energy world, clean energy world with democratized and decentralized energy. So yeah, that's some of the work that we do at WECAN, and always centering women and indigenous, Black and brown voices, and really bringing forward a different vision of the future than we see now.
Wow. I can see how slow living might feel like it evades you at times. It's amazing.
But on the other hand, you nailed it with your description of slow living and what it means to you. Absolutely.
I think that with the slow living thing and doing things that we're passionate about, there has to be room for all of it. You can't you can't do the slow living unless it's different from the other living. I don't know. And the other stuff is just as good. And, I find when I'm doing things that I'm passionate about, I could do it all day, every day. Anyways, that was a tangent. Can you also say again the names of, you have 2 books, correct? And then also anywhere else people can find you if you're on social media or if you have a newsletter, anything like that, where people can follow your work.
Thank you for asking. So yeah, WECAN website, wecaninternational.org. There's a place to sign up for a newsletter. And it's a great way to stay in touch with us. We should put out like a newsletter once a month around. And, you get to hear about all the programs or things you can participate in. We also have a Facebook page and Instagram and X, formerly Twitter. So we're on all those platforms. And then I have my own personal Facebook page and Instagram account under my name. So those are all ways to stay in touch. And then, yes, thanks for asking again. I'm so excited because the book just came out. So I'm so excited. The story is how worldviews and climate justice can remake a world in crisis. And it just has everything we're talking about in it. And I hope people really enjoy it. It's something that feels like I put it out as something reciprocal to be in conversation with people about, so I hope people will really enjoy that and go to, even though it may not be our favorite place, Amazon, order it on Amazon and leave a review there.
Yes.
My publicist keeps telling me, you have to tell people to go to Amazon and Goodreads and leave reviews and get your book on Amazon and go. Mm-hmm. So that's my commercial. Thank you for letting me do my little commercial, and thank you for the support.
Of course. I think, Mom, that seems like a Lady Farmer book club book.
Book club.
So stay
Absolutely.
tuned.
I was just going to say, I think I know what our next book club pick is in our community. We have a slow living community.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes. I have been deeply touched by this conversation, and it's given me so much
truly
to think about.
Me too. This was really wonderful. Thank you both so much. It's so beautiful to be with a mother-daughter team. I'm really moved by what you're doing and how you're being together, and the whole thing has been just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at WeAreLadyFarmer. That's WeAreLadyFarmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.